clay container sat in the middle of the table like a guest no one quite knew how to greet. It was no larger than a small loaf of bread, yet it seemed to draw the eyes of everyone in the tent. Each time someone's gaze drifted away, it inevitably returned, as though the object itself was silently insisting on attention. The seal was mesmerizing. A heart framed by two crossed reeds, pressed deep enough into the clay to survive centuries of wind, heat, and shifting earth. It wasn't ornate. There were no flourishes, no lines wasted on decoration. Its simplicity felt deliberate, purposeful. Layla leaned in until her breath almost misted the surface. "It doesn't feel ceremonial," she murmured. "It feels personal." Marcus nodded, "Like something you'd only give to one person." Farouk was already moving toward the tools. "Let's prepare." The archaeologists had done this countless times, opening clay containers without damaging their contents. But there was a different weight to the work tonight. It wasn't the difficulty of the task, but the sense that whatever they found inside, they would be intruding on a moment that was never meant for them. Layla spread a fresh square of white linen across the table. Marcus laid out the tools, a fine chisel, a small steel pick, and 3 brushes. One stiff, one soft, one so delicate its bristles were finer than a human hair. Amina checked her camera, adjusting the focus, the click of its mechanisms the only sound in the tent. Outside, the night remained perfectly still. The desert wind had gone entirely, and even the flapping of the tent walls had stopped. The lantern flames stood tall and unwavering, casting long shadows that reached toward the object as though they too were curious. Farouk rested his hands on the table's edge. "When you break a seal like this," he said quietly, "you don't just open an object. You open a moment in time. Whoever made this, they were thinking of someone. Maybe someone far away, maybe someone they could never see again. That thought was the last thing that touched this clay before it hardened." He stepped back, letting Layla take the lead. Her hands were steady, but her eyes betrayed the mix of caution and excitement that hummed through the room. She positioned the chisel against a thin ridge near the seal and gave the gentlest twist. A tiny sound, not loud enough to be called a crack, slipped into the air. The first fragment of clay flaked away, revealing a pale shadow beneath. A scent followed, so faint it took a moment for anyone to notice. Dry, earthy, but with the slightest trace of something almost sweet. "Papyrus," Farouk murmured. Marcus moved in with the smallest brush, clearing away the loosened dust. Another fragment came free, and then another. They worked slowly, each chip of clay set aside in the order it came off, like preserving the petals of a fragile flower. The group said little, each focused on the careful rhythm of the process. Loosen, lift, brush, set aside. Minutes passed, or maybe more. Time had no shape here, only the gentle repetition of hands working toward something delicate and hidden. Piece by piece, the container gave up its grip, revealing the tightly rolled sheet within. When the final layer of clay came away, the papyrus sat bare in Layla's hands, lighter than it should have been, as though time had stolen everything but the message itself. The fibers were yellowed but intact, the edges frayed like worn fabric. The ink had faded into a deep brown, but under the glow of the lanterns, the strokes were still visible. Not the rigid lines of an official decree, but the flowing curves of handwriting meant for a single reader. Layla exhaled slowly, setting the papyrus onto the linen. No one spoke. It was Amina who finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful." Farouk leaned over the sheet, his magnifier trembling slightly in his grip. His eyes scanned the first few characters, his lips moving without sound. Then his expression shifted, not to shock, not to triumph, but to something quieter. "This is not a record," he said finally. "It's not an inventory, not a treaty. It's not even a prayer." Layla's brows drew together. "Then what is it?" He looked up at her, and for a moment the lantern light caught in his eyes, making them shine. "It's a letter." A pause settled over the tent, heavy and electric. Marcus's voice was soft but certain. "To someone they loved." Farouk nodded once. "Yes." The papyrus seemed to hum in the silence, as if the words inked upon it were waiting to breathe again. No one dared touch it yet. There was an unspoken understanding that opening the clay had been one act of intrusion, but reading the words would be another. Layla glanced toward the tent's open flap. Beyond it, the desert stretched endlessly under the moonlight, the horizon a faint silver curve. 3,000 years, she said, and now, tonight, the desert at night feels alive in ways the day can never match. Under the sun, it's a world of heat and glare. Every shape bleached by light, every movement slowed by the weight of the air. But once darkness falls, the desert breathes again. A cool wind slips across the dunes, whispering in the language of sand. The stars sharpen above you, not the faint dusting you see in a city, but millions of hard, cold points, scattered in patterns so old that ancient eyes once used them to tell stories. The moon is high tonight, pale and swollen, its light silvering every ridge, every tent rope, every fragment of stone that juts from the earth, like the knuckles of something long buried. In the middle of this vast openness, a cluster of black canvas tents huddles around a pit in the ground. From a distance, the sight could be mistaken for a caravan stopped to rest. But up close, you'd see the difference. There are no camels, no traders, no market fires, only quiet, disciplined movement. A handful of people who have chosen to spend their night gently peeling history from the earth. Dr. Elias Farouk stands at the edge of the main trench, his figure tall and still in the moonlight. His white linen shirt flaps softly in the breeze, and a scarf wraps around his neck, more for the biting wind than for style. He's been leading digs like this for decades, but he knows enough to recognize when the desert is about to give him something rare. And tonight, it feels like the sand is holding its breath. Two younger archaeologists, Layla and Marcus, work several feet below him, their knees pressed into the soft dust. They move with slow precision, brushing away compacted sand from an object just beginning to emerge. Its shape is irregular, but not random. The curve of it suggests intention. The surface catches the lantern light in a way that stone does not. "It's not pottery," Layla murmurs, leaning closer. Her brush sweeps away a thin film of sand, revealing a dull brown surface beneath. Marcus tilts his head, examining the faint ridges along one side. "Clay," he says. "But worked clay." Farouk doesn't move, but his voice drifts down to them. "Be gentle. You're looking at something that hasn't seen the sky in 3,000 years. The wind stirs again, scattering loose grains into the trench. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the tents, a jackal calls, the sound thin and distant. Layla pauses, frowning. There's a mark here. She brushes more carefully, her movements slowing as the design takes shape. The clay has been stamped with a seal, a stylized heart, flanked by two crossed reeds. The lines are shallow but still crisp, as though the hands that made them pressed with quiet certainty. Marcus glances up. "Not royal," he says. "No," Farouk replies. "Something else entirely." They work together now, freeing the object from the grip of the earth. When it finally comes loose, Layla lifts it with both hands, cradling it as though it might dissolve in her grasp. It's heavier than it looks, the clay still holding the day's warmth. The seal is unbroken. For a moment, no one speaks. The night presses in around them, the air cool and still. Even the lantern flame seems steadier, as if the wind itself is listening. The decision is made without words. They'll carry the object to the long wooden table under the central tent. The table is scarred and stained from years of work. Ink spills, blade marks, rings from coffee mugs. But tonight, it feels like an altar. The camp begins to gather. Amina, the photographer, arrives with her camera hanging from her neck, its lens cap already off. Yusuf, the cook, slips inside from his small fire, still smelling faintly of cumin and charred bread. Even Kareem, the night guard who rarely leaves his post, steps into the lantern light, his weathered face unreadable. Marcus sets the clay container down in the center of the table. For a long moment, they all simply look at it. Farouk's voice is quiet but firm. 3,000 years ago, someone closed this. They thought they were sealing it for one person. They couldn't have known we would be the ones to open it. Outside, the desert waits. The wind has died completely now, and the silence feels deeper than before, as if the entire night is leaning in. Layla rests her fingertips lightly on the clay. Whatever's inside, it's still there. And just like that, the first thread of anticipation begins to pull through the group. They can feel the shape of the story forming, though they don't yet know its details. It could be anything: an account ledger, a prayer, a threat, a confession. But deep down, something in the seal's soft curves, in the weight of the air, suggests it is none of those things. It feels personal. It feels private. The tent was quiet now, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the steady scratch of a pen. Beyond the canvas walls, the desert wind sighed through the dunes, carrying with it the faint scent of distant rain. A small oil lamp burned low on the central table, casting soft pools of light over the archaeologists' faces. They sat in a close circle, the world beyond their lamplight shrinking away until only this moment remained, fragile, precious, and unbroken. In the center of the table lay the letter, carefully unfurled. Its edges were jagged where the clay seal had once embraced it, its surface speckled with flecks of ancient sand. The characters were drawn in ink so faded that some lines were barely visible, yet the shapes held their dignity, each stroke a testament to the hand that had once guided it. A language long dead, its alphabet forgotten by all but the scholars who had devoted their lives to resurrecting it. The lead epigrapher leaned forward, the lamplight catching the rim of his glasses. His voice was barely above a whisper, as though afraid the wrong volume might shatter the spell. "This," he began, "is a letter of affection? Maybe, no, not maybe. This is a love letter." No one spoke at first. The statement hung in the air like incense, curling slowly into the minds of everyone present. They were prepared for a record of trade, a political decree, a plea to the gods for rain or victory in battle. But this, words of the heart, from a hand long turned to dust, it was as if the writer had reached across 3 millennia just to speak to them. The first lines were simple: "To the one my heart knows without name." The translator read aloud. The phrase was strange, poetic, not an address to a spouse, not even to a lover named openly, but to someone whose identity was wrapped in secrecy. In those ancient times, love was often bound by duty, marriages arranged to unite families or seal alliances. A union of hearts, free from such obligations, might have had to exist in the shadows. The ink spoke of longing, of stolen glances by firelight, of moments that lingered in the memory like the last ember of a dying flame. The writer compared their beloved's voice to the sound of wind through cypress trees after rain, their eyes to the still water in the sacred pool before the priests have broken its surface. Around the table, the listeners leaned in. The tent seemed smaller now, the air warmer, as though they were not merely hearing these words but sharing the intimacy they carried. The letter described nights spent awake under the same stars, separated by walls, but bound in thought. It spoke of promises made without words, of dreams where 2 souls walked through orchards, heavy with blossom, their hands brushing but never fully touching. Listen to this. The translator's voice softened, reverent. "If the gods decree we may never walk side by side in the sun, then let us meet in the night where only the moon sees our faces." A chill moved through the group, not from the desert wind, but from the sudden realization of how human, how familiar these emotions were. The centuries had not dulled them. The letter bore signs of careful folding, perhaps carried in a pouch close to the heart. A small smudge in one corner hinted at a tear, or perhaps a drop of water from a fountain where the writer once sat to compose their words. Tiny, nearly invisible patterns in the fibers revealed it had been written on papyrus, a material both delicate and precious. Whoever the recipient was, they had treasured it, enough to keep it hidden, but safe, through whatever storms their life had weathered. One archaeologist, a younger woman with keen eyes, leaned forward. "Imagine," she said quietly, "being the only person alive who can hear their voice now." It wasn't just a remark, it was a truth. In that tent, in that moment, they alone were the bridge between the dead and the living. The translator continued, "I cannot offer you gold or land or the blessing of my Father, but I can give you my words, which will outlast us both. When you read them, I am with you, no matter where the sun falls or the rivers flow." It was then they realized the letter might never have been delivered. Perhaps it was hidden intentionally to protect both the writer and the recipient. Perhaps the one it was meant for never read it at all. That thought, that this confession had waited 3,000 years to be heard, sat heavy in the room. To understand these words fully, they had to imagine the world they were born into. The city where this letter was penned stood along the trade routes of an early kingdom, its streets alive with merchants selling cinnamon, lapis, and fine linen. Temple bells rang in the mornings, calling the faithful to offer grain or incense to the gods. Life was ruled by seasons, the rise and fall of the river dictating harvests and celebrations. Love, in such a place, was rarely a private matter. The night had deepened by the time the last words of the letter were spoken. The desert air carried a slight chill now, and the stars above seemed sharper, more vivid, as if they too were part of the story unfolding. The archaeologists sat in silence for several minutes, their minds each caught in different currents of thought. Some were thinking of the man who had written it, others were imagining the woman who had read it, and some, perhaps more than they would admit, were thinking of their own first loves, of the letters and words they had once written or received. There was a strange stillness in the air, the kind you feel when the past presses close to the present. A thin thread seemed to run from that unknown writer's hand to theirs, across 30 centuries, across the rise and fall of empires, across the birth of languages and the death of civilizations. That thread wasn't made of ink or parchment. It was made of emotion, of longing, of hope, of the quiet bravery it takes to put one's heart into words. The letter was carefully sealed again in its protective case. Tomorrow it would be taken to a lab where the ink could be analyzed, the fibers dated, and every symbol digitally recorded. But tonight, under the moon's gaze, it felt less like an artifact and more like a ghost, softly breathing, waiting to speak again. The lead historian, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled tightly under her scarf, spoke at last. "It's always the small things," she murmured. "We come here expecting to find kings, battles, and monuments, and instead we find this, someone's heart still beating on the page." Her words hung in the air. It was true. Grand histories are often written in the names of rulers, in the lists of wars and conquests. But love leaves a different kind of legacy. It doesn't demand statues or gold. It hides itself in letters tucked into clay jars, in songs whispered by fires, in the scent of flowers pressed between pages. And sometimes it waits patiently, as if knowing it will one day be found. The younger members of the team wanted to know more. "Do you think she ever read it?" one asked. "Maybe it never reached her. Or maybe she read it and kept it hidden until her death. Maybe she wrote back." That last thought sparked something in the group. If this was one letter, could there be more? Could an entire conversation have survived the centuries? Somewhere in the ruins, in the rubble of collapsed homes, or under layers of river silt, might there be another jar, another folded scrap of parchment waiting to be uncovered? The possibility made them restless, like treasure hunters sensing gold nearby. But the historian reminded them that even a single letter was a miracle. "We're holding a voice that should have been silenced by time," she said. "The fact that it speaks at all is a gift." They began to discuss what the letter meant beyond its words. To a historian, it was a keyhole into the private lives of an ancient people. To a linguist, it was a rare, complex example of syntax and metaphor in a nearly lost language. To a romantic, whether they admitted it or not, it was proof that the human heart has not changed, no matter how many centuries pass. In their world, the idea of romance often came wrapped in layers of formality. Marriages were arranged, alliances forged for trade or power. And yet, here was a man, possibly a scholar, perhaps a merchant's son, risking disapproval, maybe even punishment, to confess his feelings. That act alone was rebellion in its purest form, not against kings or armies, but against the silence that fear demands. One archaeologist, a quiet man with a love of poetry, suggested that the letter might have been written during a time of political unrest. "Maybe that's why it feels so urgent," he said. "When the world is uncertain, love becomes sharper, more desperate." The others nodded. The thought made sense. After all, love in dangerous times often burns brighter because it knows how easily it can be extinguished. The translator, who had been silent for a while, added something unexpected. "There's a line in the middle," she said, "about the river carrying words faster than footsteps. I think that's a clue. Perhaps they lived in separate cities connected by the same waterway. He might have trusted traders or boatmen to deliver his message. That's why he calls it sending with the wind. He meant sending it with the river wind." It was a beautiful image, a letter traveling along the river, under the watch of the moon, its secrets carried by strangers, its destination uncertain, and somewhere downstream a woman waiting, perhaps not even sure if a message would come, but hoping all the same. Hours passed before they began to pack their equipment. The desert was quiet except for the crunch of boots on sand and the occasional murmur between colleagues. But inside each of them carried something unspoken. They had come here to study the past.